Liberals will elect their next leader and the next prime minister in 2 weeks' time. For now, it looks like it's Mark Carney's race to lose. The former Bank of Canada governor leads the way in fundraising, high-profile endorsements, and in the polls. But his rivals will have a chance to push back in a big way this week at two debates, one in French and one in English, both taking place in Montreal. Karina Gould is vying for the top job. Hi, Ms. Gould. Good to see you. Thanks for making the time.
Happy to be here, Vashi.
If you win and ultimately do become the next leader of the party, the next prime minister, will you go straight to an election?
Oh, well, I am going to see where the country is at that moment in time, because if we are in the midst of a trade war with the United States, we need to make sure that the entire energy of the government is focused on defending Canada and defending Canadians. So I'm going to want to see where we are on March 10th.
What do you mean, I guess, by trade war? Because it sort of already feels like we're on the precipice of one. And in the opposition's argument, and some of your rivals actually in the race have seemed to intimate that if there is that kind of force that we're up against, that the government will need a very clear mandate, whatever that government is, hence the desire to see an election sooner rather than later. Do you not share that belief?
My belief and where I stand on this is, as the government, we need to do what is in the best interest of Canadians. And, you know, the 30-day reprieve on the threat from Trump with regards to tariffs is going to be ending in a matter of days. And so I think we need to understand. And if we do have 25% tariffs slapped across the board, I think the energy of the country is best focused on working to ensure that we get those tariffs removed. But let's see where we are on March 10th. I think that is the responsible thing to do, and to ensure that, you know, whatever I do as Prime Minister, it is always with the best interests of Canada and Canadians in mind.
But Canadians will not have voted for you as Prime Minister, right? Liberals.
Well,
Canadians who are Liberals.
I am an elected member of Parliament.
Yes, but as Prime Minister, the Liberals will have put you in that position, not Canadians writ large. And yet you will be tasked with, you know, defending all of them, which is like what I think is the impetus behind the call for an election sooner rather than later.
Well, so as I mentioned, I do have a seat in the House of Commons, so I can actually sit there when I become Prime Minister. But look, there will be an election at some point this year, right? We have a fixed election date in October. So whether that is, you know, an election that is called earlier or until then, the decision that I will make as Prime Minister is going to be about defending Canada. You know, if we need to have a massive support program for Canadians because we have hundreds of thousands of people who have lost their job, or we need to ensure businesses can keep their doors open so that when we do win a potential trade war, Canadians have good jobs to go back to, that's the decision that I'm going to make at the time. So, you know, I'm not going to say that I'm going to call an early election or wait until later, until I know exactly where we stand on March 10th.
But even, for example, if you have to introduce something like that massive support project, that's something that is in line with the likes of which we had seen during the COVID pandemic, do you not need a mandate supported by all Canadians versus just those in your party?
Well, we would need the support of an opposition party as well, because we still have a minority government in Ottawa. So, you know, as I said, Vashi, I don't think it's right for me to make that decision right now when we really need to see where we are on March 10th, and we need to know what it is that Canadians need in that time as well. So, you know, I'm going to make sure that Canadians have the support that they need, that the government is focused on delivering for Canada and standing up for Canada, particularly if we are in a situation where our economy is under threat. I think that's what Canadians expect.
You mentioned you have a seat rather in the House of Commons. I think that was in reference to the one person who's running who doesn't, or one of the people running who doesn't. That's Mark Carney. According to fundraising data filed with Elections Canada that came out this week, he's raised $1.9 million in donations from over 11,000 donors. You've raised $236,000 from 1,300 contributors. I know that that's not the full picture, that you've updated the number of donors, but it still is far less than Mark Carney. How do you convince Liberals who will be voting in just a few weeks that their vote isn't wasted with you?
Oh my goodness. I am hearing from people across the country who are so excited about my candidacy. I mean, I just got back from the prairies, had hundreds of people out in Alberta and Saskatchewan to meet with me. People drove a couple of hours to come see me from more rural parts. There is so much momentum and excitement building across the country. And what I'm hearing from Liberals is that they are excited and glad that I'm in the race, and they're very hopeful about what the results are going to be in a couple of weeks. And look, I think it's terrific that this leadership race is engaging the diversity of people that we have in this country, that they are not just signing up, but they're also making donations, and that's a really good thing for the party.
If there was, though, the level of excitement that you're expressing, would that not be reflected in the fundraising numbers? Like, he is so far ahead of you and your other candidates.
Yeah, and that's great. That's lots of money that is available for not just this leadership race, but also for the party. But I've had thousands of people donate to my campaign as well. Placing us second in this leadership race. And there's still 2.5 weeks to go, and we know that a day or a week in politics can sometimes be a lifetime. So there's lots of time left in this leadership race, and I just continue to feel that momentum and continue to be so encouraged by the support that I'm getting right across the country.
So let me try and ask this as tactfully as I possibly can, because I'm sure you're observing headlines in the same way that I am, right? This idea that it's a fait accompli, that Mr. Carney is so far ahead in public opinion polling, not just vis-a-vis the other candidates, but other parties as well, that he is out fundraising you and your other colleagues to such a great degree that this is essentially a done deal. Is that not a fair assumption given the data that is available?
Well, Vashi, you've watched a lot of elections over time, and you know as well as I do that polling is a moment in time, and you can start a race in one place and end it in a very different place. So, what I've seen and what I've felt in my candidacy is just continued building momentum. From where I started, my goodness, how long ago was it? 5 weeks ago, to where I am today. It's just building more support, more donations, more volunteers coming on board, more people reaching out saying that they're going to be voting for me and excited about it. So, we've got 2.5 weeks to go, and I'm just going to keep that momentum building.
I want to ask about some of the policies that you've proposed as well, and in particular, kind of how you're going to pay for them. You've proposed a universal basic income, or at least a path there, as well as a 1-year GST cut. And you've also proposed increasing federal corporate taxes from 15% to 17% for corporations that earn more than $500 million a year in profits. I wanted to ask about, I guess, the logic of the increase to corporate taxes. I understand it's to pay for other things, but in this environment, particularly with the tariffs potentially down the road and the policies being pursued to cut taxes in the United States, is that really the smartest move? Like, doesn't that make us less competitive?
Well, not for the wealthiest companies. So remember, this is for companies that are earning over $500 million a year. This is companies like the big banks, like Loblaws, like some of the big energy resource companies who, quite frankly, we have a productivity challenge in this country. And instead of them reinvesting in innovation and building productivity, they're holding on to those profits. So if they want to make those investments, then that's great, and their corporate taxes won't go up. But if they're not, I think they need to contribute to Canadian society as well in the form of paying out those additional taxes. And it's still less than the federal rate in the United States. And what I announced on Tuesday when I was in Edmonton was that I'm also going to create a growth economy. I have an ambitious goal of creating 1 million new entrepreneurs in Canada, creating an environment that enables them to create their business, grow their business, and keep their business here in Canada, to change the tax system, to incentivize them to do that. And so part of it is saying, let's have a strong, robust, diverse economy where people can grow and succeed, while also making sure that we're taking care of our most vulnerable.
And I certainly do understand that, but it feels as though that's absent the current context. Like, if the United States is continuing to cut corporate taxes to incentivize investment there, like, there are people that say that this is Donald Trump trying to crush Canadian manufacturing and move it to the United States. Like, that's the environment we're in right now. And you want to be further punitive to those corporations. Like, why?
Those manufacturers in Canada, that are, small and medium-sized enterprises. I'm from Southern Ontario. I'm from Burlington. I've got a ton of manufacturing. They're not in the $500 million
But big
range.
companies employ a lot of
Their
Canadians
taxes
too.
their taxes won't be affected by this. But the big banks who are doing really well when it comes to profits, Loblaws, other grocers in this country who, during the pandemic and during the inflation crisis, instead of, cutting their prices, they shrunk their products and, charged Canadians more. They can afford to pay a little bit more, and they're not the companies that are going to be moving to the United States.
That corporate tax hike, I think your own accounting, your own campaigns accounting said it would bring in about $6 billion a year. The GST cut would cost about $11 billion a year. And then there's various calculations depending on a bunch of things when it comes to UBI, but certainly that won't be cheap either. Do you plan to raise other taxes? And if so, what would they be?
No, what I'm planning is when it comes to UBI to open a path, I think we need to study this. I've said that I want to bring forward a plan within a year to modernize our social safety net. But Vashi, poverty costs money. It costs money in our healthcare system. It costs money.
Yeah, I'm
in
not
our
saying it isn't. I'm just asking if you're going to pay for that eventually through additional tax hikes.
This is an important investment in vulnerable Canadians to give them the equal playing field to be successful. And so for me, this makes sense. And I think for Canadians, as I hear from them across the country, this is something that they care about too. They want us to have a strong economy, and they want it to be fair for everyone.
And I completely understand that sentiment. I think you're right that a lot of Canadians would agree, but that stuff doesn't just happen. Like, you have to pay for it somehow. Are you willing, for example, to run a much larger structural deficit than the one that exists right now in order to see that promise fulfilled a year out, whatever it happens to be? Or are you going to raise other taxes because the tax hike you've identified is not enough to cover it all?
That's why I'm also looking to create a growth economy when it comes to entrepreneurship in this country. I'm not planning on raising personal income taxes, and I'm not planning on raising corporate taxes except for the richest companies in Canada, companies that can afford to pay more of their fair share. But I'm also there to ensure that every single Canadian has access to the supports they need to be successful so that they can contribute to our economy and to our society in more meaningful ways.
Okay, I'll leave it on that note. I'm out of time. I appreciate your time, Ms. Gould, as always. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Vashi.